Thank you for joining today. We're really excited about today's session. And I'm just going to start with introducing who we have today on this Mindcast session. Please welcome Deepa. Deepa Prahalad is an author, a speaker, and an innovation and a design strategy consultant with an emphasis on emerging markets and social innovation. She has worked with startups and large multinationals and researched and co-authored the book that we spoke about, Predictable Magic, which unleashes the power of design strategy to transform your business, which was selected by Fast Company as one of the best design books of the year. She is also a frequent blogger on the Huffington Post, Harvard Business Review, and other publications. Deepa also holds a BA in economics and political science from the University of Michigan, a deadly combination if you ask Trump, and an MBA and an MBA from the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth. She's an elected member of the International Academy of Management and was ranked 34 on the inaugural Thinkers 50 India list. She also is a member of Marshall Goldsmith 100 Coaches Program, selected from among 16,000 applicants worldwide. Deepa is active in non-profit boards. She serves on the advisory boards of the Global Peter Drucker Forum, Arogya World, as she just spoke about, and is a patron of the India Spora Forum. Deepa is also an advisor and investor for Rematerials, an innovative and transformational roofing company, and an art enthusiast. She, as you can see from her background, she's on the board of the Committee for Arts of the Indian Subcontinent CAIS at the San Diego Museum of Art. So, welcome, Deepa. We are really excited about this conversation. Thank you so much. And that was like two lifetimes of achievements and
No,
work
no,
that
not
I
at
just
all.
spoke about.
Thank you so
Speaking
much.
of
Great to
lifetimes
be here.
of yeah. Speaking of lifetimes of achievement, we have Sonia Manchanda as the host today. Sonia is a designer and a strategist who co-founded Spread Design and Innovation, where she leads interdisciplinary teams to build brands, experiences, systems that scale with impact. Over 3 decades, she has developed frameworks, tools, and networks that are now shaped into Mind, a human imagination lab. I will speak about that towards the end as well. That is designed to enable people to think creatively, solve complex problems, and prototype the future. Sonia is also the creator of the Dreaming Project, a global open innovation initiative that explores how design can move beyond solving problems to enabling people to dream big and to believe and realize their biggest aspirations. She currently serves as the first Indian woman on the board of the World Design Organization, where she has been re-elected for a second term. And through her work, Sonia continues to explore how design can bring people, ideas, and systems together to shape more inclusive and sustainable futures. So I think there's a lot of intersection between the both of them where we are talking about strategy and systems and the magic of design and businesses. So I hope you're all excited, and I'm just going to open it up for Deepa and Sonia to take it forward. So Sonia, over to you.
Thanks, Asta. Thanks for holding on to the energy and getting everybody in the doors. I have a small grouse with Deepa. I know, after the pandemic, we all got comfortable with all this Zoom, etc., etc. But you've been meeting my friends in San Diego. You've been meeting people I know in Coimbatore, but you haven't come and met me, and that's not fair. So,
I am the first to want to correct that. Yes.
but we're not making up for that here and now. So that I'm just still going to hold against you. Uh, so, we've had so many lovely conversations, and I've always learned so much from you. And the insights that come out when we talk are always amazing. So I'm looking forward to today's conversation. Um,
Same.
I want to start with your book, and I want to, you say something about how innovation is not, isn't luck. It's a pattern. So at this moment, what are you working on? Are you breaking the pattern, or are you continuing on a certain pattern, and you're sort of sure of the success that will come from continuing on that pattern? So that's my first sort of line of inquiry and question that I have for you.
Well, the premise of the book was actually, which I co-authored with Ravi Sani, that really honed my thinking into the importance of emotional connection. That was the central premise we had, is that really the difference between the products and services that succeed and those that don't, isn't really about pricing and marketing. It's about that ability to forge an emotional connection. And how do you do that in a crowded marketplace? How do you build trust? And we really came upon this idea that, for different people, that connection is built in different ways. But what really is the make or break for design is that really tight and cohesive fit between the actual physical design of the product and service and the narrative around it, because that is what creates trust, is just having a fit between those two. And we explored that in a lot of different industries. So that kind of has peppered my thinking. And what I'm working on now is, I think a lot of people who are, businesses being asked to weigh in on issues that they didn't have to before, right? So having a point of view about sustainability, about inclusion, which I know is a passion for both of us, how systems can work better. All of these things are long term, they're collective. And I think that orientation toward build a business case, and that's when people start to move. I think there's some limitations to that, because at the outset, we don't really know what works. So, how do you get people to care and sustain some kind of energy until a reasonable approach is found? So, what I'm trying to work on, and it's in research phases, is really what I call building the human case. How do you create an experiment and a conversation that is big enough that you bring the right collaborators and others to the table? So something like microfinance really started with a $127 loan, right? The people have to be motivated enough to try something. And the sometimes design is this iterative process. There's a lot of experimentation. But what we really kind of look back at some of the very meaningful advances in the past, few decades, and I'm like, well, a lot of those experiments didn't reveal a solution. What they revealed was human potential, where there was a lot of doubt that, about how you pierce this very difficult problem. And, like, I think, why do we have this internet revolution and widespread broadband access? And why is that now seen as a solution to poverty? And it was, again, fairly simple experiment, right? The hole in the wall, which really, a lot of these experiments are pretty low risk, pretty inexpensive, but they start that, ripple effect that we all strive for. So that's something I'm working on exploring and collecting cases from around different countries.
I like that. So you're saying building the human case, and a certain accountability from industry. And what I'm hearing is, I think it's an attitude. It's an attitude that industry must have, or leaders in industry must have, and a certain something that we think about here a lot is about intentionality.
Yep.
So if the intention is that my business must make money, you will make that money at any cost, and that cost could even be a human cost. On the other hand, what you're talking about is, if we are thinking about the human first, we're thinking of the human aspirations, needs, wishes, and desires first. And then maybe we are in a situation where our intentionality changes, and the intentionality becomes inclusive, because it's not just about your business, about yourself. It's about including others, and creating a win-win. And
Yeah,
maybe then we can move more people from the bottom of the pyramid at least towards the middle, because we
yeah.
are concerned about how we can move them, and we are concerned about the human case. Let me ask you, so when what's the sort of attitude, or what are the sort of attitudes that you think are important, that maybe even something that's more personal, something that you feel that these are certain attitudes I think are very, very important for maybe not short term but long term and sustained success? Maybe what we're
Yeah,
doing is
like
there's a lot of this, I mean, we need to win and we need to win now. There's a short termism. Annual targets are important, quarters are important, and we are not thinking about sustained success. So what are those attitudes, and what are those attitudes that maybe starts from you? You feel this way and you would like others to feel this way, because it's not so much something that we want others to do. What are we doing? How do we respond to change?
Yeah, so I think that like I said, emotional connection is not just important for business. The interesting thing about it is that it's actually one of the very few sources of advantage that actually grows over time. Most other advantages in technology, and frankly, even beautiful design, deplete very quickly, right? So, like when Apple came out with all these beautiful iPhones and iPads, and no matter how much hard work it took you to get there, it can be copied so quickly, right? The aesthetics are not a really sustainable advantage. It's really the community, the bonds that are there. And I think emotional connection is not just important when things, in order to propel you to success. I think it's often even more important when things don't go as planned. Because when you have the companies that really enjoy, and the startups and the individuals that have deep connections, that those are the people who get help to recoup, to rebuild. People, the friends who are there as your users to call out mistakes. If you see an Apple can, have a product flaw, and then people are logging on and trying to help you fix it, right? Because you are sharing that opportunity. But I also think that, one of the things I've realized, especially with dealing with systemic change, my big learning is I just kind of go in with this thing of survival is the ultimate design brief. That has been my learning. That look at this as just your own life. When suddenly your resources feel scarce, you become far more creative, far more, you give a lot more thought to every action. So that idea of intentionality comes in very quickly. And I've learned to recognize that the resource gap sometimes is a one way, but the knowledge gap is two ways, right? And so you really have to go in with an attitude of, why does something exist? Before I think about what needs to be changed, why does it exist? Why is this the best available solution at the time? Because the people who have struggled with the problem have spent a lot of time thinking about it. And the only thing that grants you the ability and the authority and the affection to propose a change is giving people that time and that level of respect.
But doesn't business have this whole issue, and per se, don't we have this issue of survival of the fittest? When you say survival, it's kind of always competitive. So, what is the opposite of competitive? I mean, how do you ensure that you can build that emotional connection? And I think it's so very important for creative folks, because if you're creating a piece of music, if you're creating a design, I know when we developed some 16 million square feet of retail, we were putting soul into those properties,
Mm?
and we were trying to make sure that those were inclusive and that it was for everyone, and we were transforming India with retail. So that's we started as creators from that intentionality. But the issue with business, and when you look at, maybe there's a lot of optimism, there's a lot of naivety almost as far as creative folk are concerned, and we are heart people. But business is a headspace, and in that headspace, it's about competition, it's about survival of the fittest. So, That's why those attitudes are important. How do we get the next generation to survive in a competitive business kind of space while keeping those values and attitudes that sort of come with being creative, a certain um, higher level of sensitivity and appreciation of the world around them, how to keep the sanctity of that while getting into the business space and creating value there, so creating shared value, creating meaning there, both meaning and shared value there.
I think this is where designers can do a tremendous amount to push back, Sonia. Let me challenge you on that a little bit because I came more from the business and consulting world. I always had a deep interest in art and design, but that was something I came into later. It felt very natural, felt like a home, but that wasn't my educational background. So I actually think designers should just spend a tiny bit of time looking under the hood, and they can have far more influence if they are able to articulate the value that they add, right? Because careers are not made and broken based on what you know, they're based on what you ship, what you execute. And I think if you spend a little time giving the same empathy to the stakeholder, like what is at stake for the person who is engaging you in a design effort, you can actually get very far. And also, I think don't be so intimidated by frameworks and PowerPoints and slides, because I kind of explain that this way, that your sketch or your prototype is actually equivalent to anybody's pro forma financial projections, right? Until something is out in the market, both of these are fantasies. In fact, the prototype might be much more tangible because people can comment on that, they can give you feedback. And so you have shown somebody how something could look. I often just tell people, they're like, oh, well, your design isn't really that important to me. And even with startups, my simple line to them is, hey, design is the difference between people telling you you have a good idea and placing an order. It actually is really important because all the data in the world does not mean anything until it's synthesized into something that people can respond to, that they can bond with, they can share with their friends and families. So I think actually looking under the hood a little bit, you don't have to have the comprehensive, thing of every aspect of business. I think you do have to understand a little bit about how decisions are made. If you're with a big company, what is the heritage and history of the company, not just what is the consumer thing? And then can you craft your solutions so they feel like a natural continuation of that? I actually, all of us have to be, competitive, right? Why do people engage us? To help them, position themselves to do something innovative in the marketplace. I think that's a fair expectation. But investing in the common language is where I think sometimes when you don't get the results you want, that's really where the failure is. It actually isn't in a lack of respect for what others bring to the table, right? Design, I also tell people, like, you can have a lot of things that look good on paper, very talented employees, etc. But for the consumer, design is how they judge both your intentions and your capabilities. They're not lining up to read your mission statement. They are or aren't lining up to use your products to be part of whatever it is you made. So those values, unless they are reflected in what goes out on the shelf, really are meaningless in terms of driving profit or impact.
So design really, uh, I kind of agree with you, but however, I think that where designers get stuck is that design becomes about function and form, and it does not remain about feeling. It's not about the meta view, being a subject in a space to be able to pull out and to understand what other people are feeling, to understand, contextualize, to maybe be able to be the person in the room who opens up even greater possibilities than the brief presents to you. And that's where we miss out. In terms of an attitude, if we were to be um, The one, like in Gandhiji's words, it was, in a gentle way, can you shake up the world? If we can
Yeah.
just shake it up a little bit, pull out a little bit, understand what people are feeling, and maybe make the opportunity bigger. If we can play that role in the room of bringing in that feeling before we get down to function or form, maybe that we should interpret as our own role. And but does our training prepare us for that, or does
Well, I think
industry allow us that? So those are the questions I think that would be there in the heads of a lot of creative people. If you can help us unpack that a little bit.
yeah, so I think there are some straightforward things that can be done. I understand what you're saying, but I think this is where the ability to articulate how you think about a problem in a way that makes sense to people, that's really the difference oftentimes, right? If you can, designers' influence really depends on their ability to cultivate a point of view. I mean, and finding the simplest possible metaphor to get that point across can make a huge difference. I mean, one of the examples I always use is everyone has tons of data when they come in and they're like, well, how is design going to help me? And my simple answer to that is we all know there's a lot of single parent households. We know there's a lot of men who want to be active parents. We know there are gay couples. We know there are people who trade off parenting. We all know that. The only thing that that data is going to give you is precision on trends that all of us are experiencing. What a designer is going to do is say, listen, that means we need to have the diaper change facility in the men's restroom as well,
As well.
right? But you cannot just only keep describing change. You have to help people cope with change. And sometimes you do have to take a step back and say, okay, if I can help people cope and establish credibility there, very quickly, they are going to ask me to help them dream. And that's kind of how you make the in. And while people may have a vision based on what they've looked at of saying, this is my market and this is, designers can do a lot of things at any stage, even early in your careers, by just saying, let me introduce another persona that you may not have considered. Somebody, and have it as a discussion point, right? I mean, you don't have to necessarily push and insist, but then people start to respect that, okay, I'm getting this perspective I didn't have. Like there was one laundry project I was involved with for a major consumer products company. And they had their target market, their price points, and all these other things. So we said, okay, but let's look at how different people are affected in the ecosystem, how they're going. So we put Adobe in as a stakeholder in this whole process. Like said, okay, on one hand, you want to have this detergent that reaches far into the villages. Now, but who is getting impacted by that? How would these folks respond? Is there a space for this product to actually make their work better? I mean, are we completely trading off people who may not have a laundry machine? Maybe they can find a way to also be users, right? So, you know, introducing a thought process and a consideration of people who may not be in there, that's a fairly painless way to get people talking, get conversations going, whether or not you have like official authority, right? You're doing that on your own. And also really helping give people, okay, here's what has happened in other industries. People always want to feel that I know my industry. Just say, okay, I'm drawing from learnings outside. People can then absorb that lesson without feeling threatened by it. They can say, hey, this doesn't apply to me, or, oh, that's an interesting point you're
Mm.
making. Let me think about it some more. So find ways to communicate things in ways that are actually safe for you, but safe for the other person as well.
So what I'm hearing from you, so this is becoming like a masterclass in design strategy. what I'm hearing, what I'm hearing from you is, first, and I think you can't do this unless you decide to be the voice in the room and not the person just working behind the computer, because more
Yeah.
and more the computer is anyway taking over from you. So you need to be the voice in the room and the person who's willing to step out of your comfort zone, out of everybody's comfort zone, and bring in the voice of others. Bring in those voices in terms of personas, in terms of, and then be able to sort of create an argument, articulate clearly an idea, and maybe be the one prototyping that idea and saying, can we prototype something like this at very little cost? So at least we know whether we can bring in that person and we can actually serve them, and whether that can create value. And I think what you're saying is very, very important. And it's something theoretically that people understand, but are not so much willing to do. And I think the whole idea of the origination of design thinking was that you can't just sit in a room and have discussions. You need to go out there and understand what people want, then come back and talk about it, come back and respond to it. So ultimately it's that responsibility muscle that designers need to demonstrate, and even allow others to learn from their process on how business can build that. And especially today in times of complexity, to navigate that complexity even more and more, business needs it. So can we as creators be the ones who can actually bring that in? So what do you see as the role for designers in the future? Today I see that even banks are setting up design teams to be able to we offer a better experience online, because today we are not going to the banks anymore, and there is no area, as we put technology in the middle and we create distance, you know and to bring back the feeling into those interactions, into those experiences. I'm seeing more and more, like say in our work with an airport, we try to, lift the experience and make it sensorial by bringing in a smell as well, by bringing in concerts. But I'm seeing more and more that today it's about spaces being sentient, much like we're talking about AI being sentient. So it's about spaces where things come alive through lights, through music, through drones, so that you're mesmerized in the moment, you're held in that moment, you're made to feel in that moment. You take your eyes off that phone and you look up and you are immersed in that moment. So what is your advice for designers going forward in terms of the way that they should more sharply define their role in a time of AI, in a time of quick solutions? What's the role of the designer here?
Well, interestingly, when you look at a lot of successes across sectors, even very sophisticated ones, right? At the end of the day, I know both of us are so passionate about inclusion, but I think actually if you look a step back for a minute, like inclusion, I look at now as an insurance policy, not just as a philosophical virtue. Because why do companies fail often? Because they did not acknowledge or see a consumer segment that was coming up. They didn't acknowledge them. They didn't serve them. They somehow insulted them, intentionally or unintentionally, right? To dismiss them is basically. If you look, you're talking about sustainability, efficiency, whatever else, create things that are aspirational for all, that are usable for all. The real value today has moved from individuals to networks in any case. It's also, if you look the life cycle of CEOs, the life cycles of companies, the life cycle of any individual product or service that we can create have all depleted pretty significantly. So if you don't think about inclusion at the outset, it's just too hard to go back and backfill, right? It's too expensive, and people will not take the risk if something is working or seems to be working, right? I would rather cash out. And I think that's where short-termism comes in. But if you are on blast, companies are also, okay, 25-30% of your portfolio is supposed to be new product introductions. The luxury of new products is and new services is you have that choice to be inclusive at birth much more frequently. So push on that a little bit. If I look at what are the enduring brands, right? Amul is an enduring brand. They didn't give a different message to rich and poor and middle class. They didn't have different motifs. But guess what? Their branding is also much cheaper. Competing companies, advertising and marketing is 35% of their cost. With this umbrella marketing that was just saying, we're going to share the proud moments for the country with this little blue-haired girl, and we're going to keep her consistent for so long. Part of the driving of those results, that is an 8% cost in marketing. It's a significant competitive advantage. So when people say I need to be so narrow in my definition, up to a point, I kind of say, well, exclusion is profitable, inclusion is far more profitable long term. So that's there are exceptions. I mean, each industry has different dynamics. But I think that overall, especially with consumer-facing products, services, look at all the successes. What is enabling all the growth in a place like India? Platforms like Aadhaar, Paytm, Universe, Digi Yatra, all of these things. And those are not created for multiple segments, right? I mean, focus. I think we also always have to step back and say, yes, focus builds strong companies. Respect for diversity builds strong societies. Give some thought and respect to both as you're creating anything.
Amazing. I think you need to speed up that book because I think the world needs it. You need to speed that up because what you're saying is fundamentally the human case is business can be a way to lift lives. If we are inclusive, and I think that we can be far more successful. And I definitely think it's your deep knowledge of business and your deep understanding of design brought together that allows you to make this very sharp sort of case. And maybe I'm going to just now ask you that if you're looking at, say, young talent who's working with us and who's sort of this bridge, working on this bridge, solving challenges between industry and academia, you know, uh, what's that one value? You're saying inclusion. Um, is it to be able to listen better? Is it to be able to articulate better? Is it to be able to sort of what's your one line advice to them?
My
What
one
should
line
they do? I
advice
understand what you're saying about business, but what should they do? What is your one line advice to them?
My one line advice is very simple, Sonia. I always have come to terms with one thing. I said, momentize, then monetize. And what I mean by that is very simple. Whether it's startups, whether it's nonprofits, whether it's social movements, help people understand the moment that inspired you to act. If there is an opportunity to immerse them, like with a product, let them try it out, let them test it, do that. Otherwise, have a very compelling story that takes them back to that moment. And what that does is it helps people understand why they should care, right? Look at how many new consumer segments have emerged in the last 20, 30 years. Why? Because all the causes we've become aware of. Okay, human trafficking. How do I understand that maybe somebody is autistic? Maybe they're not actually intentionally behaving a certain way. Maybe there's some ways that people can navigate it. Oh, and by the way, here's some strengths that come along with this condition. All of those things are basically helping people care and understand. And from that, you can go out and have influence and impact only when people are aware and they also take that issue as their own and they see themselves somewhere. So if you look at even things like Shark Tank, there comes a point when people are like, I'm not familiar with this space, but I'm interested. And then they will always turn around and ask some variation of, how did you think of this idea? Because they want to know what was that moment. And that moment is what they're betting on. I mean, the numbers, even if people seem impressed, everything changes once they have to put their own money in, right? There's a zillion more layers of scrutiny that will come. So what you have to help people understand is there an impact that I can make? That appeals to the aspiration of people writing the checks as well as the person asking for one. That's how you kind of create, common ground and movement. And people do invest in crazy things. Look at even things like Jaipur Foot, all that. How many people who don't need that help still believe in that, share that story, take pride in that story? Now, look at something like Akshay Patra. If I were to apply only business thinking, I would say, let me reduce the cost. Let me talk to the packaged food manufacturers. Let me assemble a predictable, very sterile, but easy to deliver thing that doesn't spoil. If I am saying I am going to look at that child's potential, not their economic status, and I am going to deliver a standard of meals and a standard of nutrition and a standard of taste that is exceeding what a well-to-do child would receive from their own mother. I mean, they do not have meal repetitions in some cases for 20 days. My kid wasn't that lucky. I'm like, hey, I'm busy. There's going to be some repetition, right? So I'm not going to promise you 3 weeks where you don't see something again. That is what happens when you combine the best of design thinking and the best of our human qualities. And those organizations, the people that are willing to sit with a little bit of patience on those things, they can do things that for-profit companies cannot do. They have capabilities, they have trust, they have credibility that very few for-profit or even governments have. That's just in that sector. But that's where I'm saying, am I going to say you're a liability that I somehow have to solve for? Or am I going to look at a group of kids and say, there may be one more Ramanujam who is sitting there, and I am going to design for that, right? That's where I think there's a real difference in how we approach. And that's the power of what great design does.
I really like that. I think it's a great takeaway, and I don't think it's taught at design school like that, and that's a problem. What you're saying about momentize before you monetize. It's like, if you are going out and you're doing design research, you may be taught design research, but are you taught really to be able to find that moment and have that power of observation and insight? It's one thing to go out there and go through the motions, sometimes without even emotion. You're just doing it because I'm supposed to do it. But are you the type of person? Are you becoming a type of person who is noticing those moments, who's that change maker, and coming back with that narrative that you can build about the what if? How might we transform this moment? For instance, if we are talking about that child who's going to come, who would otherwise may not want to come to study, is now getting that amazing hot sambar, with his
Mm-hmm.
idlis and her idlis, and she's getting that. And that's what keeps her going to be able to become the person she's meant to be. Now, that's a story worth telling, you know.
Yep.
So I think this is great advice for all creatives that, you need to be that person to find that moment. And I think until you
And
find that
it,
moment, your work is not done.
But interestingly, Sonia, I'm saddened to hear that design schools aren't doing more of that, because there's a lot of interest in storytelling and finding moments and stories of impact in the business world, because people are realizing that to get the energy of folks over long periods of time, they are actually really delving into archives, really trying to understand, okay, everything that is done cannot be explained just with, spreadsheets and financial things. There are all kinds of invisible decisions that are made that have an impact. So Apple, for example, App Store is huge. They also said, well, guess what? From the history of technology, unfortunately, a lot of people who adopt, technology first are not the most honorable folks. So they said, we're not accepting apps for pornography at the outset, right? So a lot of this communication, this discussion about why we are doing something and the logic for it. Now, anyone in India who follows the IT sector knows the story of how, there was a ridiculous amount of duty on imported things. And in Infosys, they called, Narayan Murthy and said, hey, there's 300% duty on this. What do we do? And he said, pay the duty. We are not giving bribes, because once that gets into the DNA, you cannot
You cannot
solve
take it
things
out.
right easily. And a lot of businesses are kind of going back to founder stories. How do I navigate? People stepped up during COVID in amazing ways too. So many of them, right? That changed our view of who is essential, who's important. Sadly, easily forgotten. I think I do advocate for designers to learn a bit about business so they can communicate effectively. But I would never advise them to abandon like what the actual motivation is, right? Even if you don't have a solution, sometimes telling people, "Well, this is what I'm observing. This is what I'm seeing. This is what I think is important." Giving people that sensibility, having that conversation, that's what makes people respect the expertise and the final outcome, is that along the way they feel like they're part of the process. So the co-creation doesn't have to be sitting down and asking people who don't know what they're doing to interfere with your work. They're not trained for that. They're not going to sit there and say, let's co-create the spreadsheet. You don't have
Mm.
to say, let's co-create my work product. But
No,
I
but
think
with the question you asked about design education, the challenge is that um, we've been so focused on, teaching skills, and there is so little time and there's so much skill to be taught, that we forget about the change making capacity or capability that we need to build. and and that's going to be a challenge in the future, because now technology can help with the skills part. So what is the
mm,
role of the designer? The role of the designer has always been to be that change maker, has always been to flip the switch and make people feel. And now we better be ready to be able to make them that person who has that attitude, um, and that courage, the courage to ask the difficult questions. So that switch needs to happen, and we should not be so caught up with just the skills, but however regulations need to change, curriculums need to change, entire systems need to change to as fast as the world is changing and AI is building up capacity. We need to build up human capacity to be able to respond to the human case. I think that uh, really is a message maybe that we need to share with the schools, not so much the designers. They would understand that
well,
faster. The young people would understand that faster, what you're saying, that they need to be the people who bring in that moment. They would want to do that. That's why they decided to become designers and not artists. Artists are about, sort of personal expression, whereas design is really about transforming the human experience itself. And that's why they're there in the first place.
yeah, and I think, if I look back at a high level, even in countries, as historically open, as historically, welcoming as the United States, if I look at the signs that were up in the 1950s and 1960s, there were, we don't serve colored, we don't serve this one, no, X, Y, and Z allowed in this establishment. And those weren't homemade signs. You could go in and buy those. And it was perfectly acceptable for business to basically tell people you don't matter, right? And as you start to create, as you start to iterate, as you start to think about expanding business and designing things differently, the signs start to change, right? Now it's like, oh, we have handicapped access.
Or a
Oh,
vegetarian in the hut. Yeah.
here's how you recycle.
Hmm.
Here's a prayer room if you have a different faith tradition, right? So that actually, that capacity for social change exists only through design, not through knowledge, not through lectures, through introducing something new, right? And that's where I think design is so powerful. I always tell people, like, especially those who are in the social space, I said, innovation is the only thing that hacks privilege. right? That has always been the only means, whether it was the printing press or anything else, that was the one thing that gave people the means to do something. So I think where designers and business people are not used to looking under the hood as much as they should. And as an economist, I'm kind of thinking, as you know, my undergrad, I'm kind of saying maybe that's the issue. Every pitch, everything you hear, it's like everyone gets up there and says their goal is to democratize X, Y, and Z. And yet here we are. And yet here we are, right? I mean, we don't necessarily see that access is translating into equity. It's not necessarily translating into opportunity. And I think designers have done a tremendous job of increasing access, giving us better usability, and all of those things. But we're not seeing that those gains are being shared. So I think now we need to really have all parties together thinking deeply about the issue of fairness, because so much value is created by users. The benefits, on the other hand, are not necessarily going to users, or the magnitude of the win-win is so crazily out of whack. Um, so I think that's an area where maybe designers need to weigh in and say, you know what, this is how the experience is going to be mapped. This is how it works. And here's where we think value addition is happening. And how do we design a business model that reflects that a bit better? Um, I think that's an area that's really ripe for exploration. It's something I've been thinking about a lot.
I agree with you. I'm now going to let the designers weigh in with their questions. I'm just going
Please, yes, I would love to
um,
help.
um, since you can, may I request you to ask your question? Let me start with Naman.
Hi,
So, okay,
hi.
yeah. You asked about balancing business requirements. I'm reminding you of your question.
Yes. How do you balance the business requirements and timeline and giving your designers enough ample time to explore so that they can create multiple personas? As a business, you are always on a deadline. So how do you manage that?
Yeah,
Well, by all
I'm
means,
just gonna point to the time. We have about 5 minutes, so we'll allow for two questions and then we'll hand the floor to Asta. Sorry, go on, Deepa.
yeah, so I mean, this is the perennial problem that we all have. By all means, respect what the clients have asked you to do. If you have observed, if you discover that people outside of that may have a use, or somebody is doing something to solve a similar problem, have some of those personas introduced. I'm not suggesting that you go off on left field and don't respect, what the needs of the client are. What I am saying is that you can push on those a little bit. And sometimes it's not more time, it's just more consideration that, okay, if something as deployed is, what are the downstream effects? Who else is affected? Let me kind of weigh in on that. Let me not only think about who is paying for my ideas, let me think about who has to live with my ideas, right? Who stands to gain? How does this help the company win? But who may be directly impacted? Now, with AI, all of us are feeling this, right? I want to be refined. I don't want to be replaced. If there's an AI that's going to make my headshot look better when I'm applying for something, I'm all for it. I don't necessarily want everything I do to be replaced. So figure out a little bit, simple question. What would make me comfortable with this? Right? When you're asking someone to change, you're asking them for this unprecedented level of trust that I am going to guide you. You're also telling people everything you were doing until then could be improved. People really only accept that message when they're inspired, they feel evolved, and like they're going to evolve, and they feel that they've been respected in the process. So focus on those things first. There may actually be one or two personas who are just kind of on the edge where they could also benefit from what you do.
Priyadarshini. Priyadarshini, your question is: in a rapidly evolving business landscape shaped by technology and uncertainty, how can leaders cultivate a design mindset across the organization, not just within design teams, to drive resilient, human centered innovation over the long term?
From the organization point of view, I think sharing the tools and the basic mindset, just like we would demand that everybody, uses Excel or whatever programming language or whatever financial, software you're using. I think there at the organizational level, a lot of people are starting to say, okay, learn the basics, because if you have to ultimately the people who rise are the ones who can oversee a project that is delivering something new to customers, right? Or bringing in new customers or collaborating with stakeholders outside. Every strategic challenge requires design. I think designers should just keep that in mind. You can have all the information in the world. Nothing moves until and unless I create something that lets things move. So I always, whatever the challenge is, it's not going to really happen without us doing something different. And designers are just really there to facilitate that and envision that. So I think from the organization level, sharing the tools. If you are a designer coming in where that hasn't happened, have that little bit of patience to teach, explain the method in ways that make sense to the person who is receiving it before you share your solution. That'll give people more of an inclination to hear you. Just like you're visiting a new restaurant, you would have researched it online ahead of time. You would have looked at what other people ordered, looked at the Instagram, read the reviews, and then you decide. So give people a little bit of that as you present your solutions so that they are prepared to receive and hear what it is you want to communicate.
I agree with you. We actually at Spread do believe that design is now strategy. And it
Absolutely.
is, and experience is the next currency, and this is what we need to change. And I like what you said about how we need to be inclusive. We need to think about what are those moments that we can transform and tell those stories and bring them into the room. So um, we can go on, and I'm going to find many such opportunities to have conversations with you, and so will the team at Spread and at mine. But I want to thank you for your time today, and it's going to be late for
Absolutely.
you. Yes. And I'm going to hand over to Asta here. Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure to be here, Sonia. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Deepa. Thank you, Sonia. Wow, that was a very enlightening session. And I'm just going to quickly articulate what I took away from this because I feel like there's so much that happened. Deepa, thank you so much for bringing out your perspective and your way of seeing things and how design becomes so important in business and bringing a long-term impact for any business. And Sonia, thank you for, just bringing this flow of where we wanted to get. Yeah, what are the learnings or what is the takeaway that we wanted to get out of this? And it really flowed well. So thank you both for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I think my main thing that I'm taking away from this is that design is really, really important, or maybe the only way right now to enable long-term impact in a way that we businesses are able to lift the people and make them see that, hey, this is how you make your dreams come true by forging connections or just to be able to show them aspirational value, even by going back into the history and the heritage of the business and bringing out how that fits with the business as well as the people it's serving, making it very inclusive as well as focused in certain areas. So thank you so much for this really wonderful session. Yeah, and I'm quickly just going to also talk about what we are doing over here at Spread. We have started We've set up a human imagination collab over here at Spread. I'm just going to share my screen as well. Mine is a human imagination collab. It's like a hybrid space for partnerships and bold exploration and experimentation, where we converge industry and academia and governance in dynamic collaborations, and we enable participants and students and partners to dream, dare, design, build, spread, and scale. It's a bridge. It's a place where we bridge talent and opportunity to be able to give a platform for success. And it's where you can prototype your future with bold imagination. And if you really want to know more about this and you're interested in becoming a partner, getting involved in this, where we are bringing in academia and industry together, where we are ensuring that, talent has a platform and a way to become capable and have that capacity to respond or build responsibility to challenges that keep coming up, and bringing in industry to mentor them, to enable them, to bring them challenges and scenarios where they can actually do this by or learn by doing, and then get industry ready, and just immediately be able to take on real world challenges. So if you're interested to know more about this, you're welcome to join the Mind community. It's a announcements only WhatsApp community, and we keep doing these sessions, these kind of sessions, and more sessions like where we bring up or talk about frameworks and tools that we cover during the whole Mind lab. So I think I'm just gonna share my screen, and there's a QR code. So if you're interested to know more about this, please scan that and join the community. And I'm going to request Raji to also put in the website link so you can reach out to us over there, because we have our contact written over there. So yeah, just give me a minute. I'll share my screen and you can um, yeah. Yeah. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, yes, Esther.
And are you able to see the QR code now? Oh, so sorry. Are you able to see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So you can go ahead and scan this, join the Mind community for more upcoming sessions, and yeah, you can check out the link. You can go to the website and you can reach out to us at any point. If you know someone, who's working in this space where they need this kind of a platform or a bridge where, we bring the industry and academia together, designers, innovators, leaders, and our whole network opening up to young students, please reach out to us, and definitely just join the Mind community just for the fun of it and fun sessions like this. So on that note, I'm also going to thank Deepa Prahalad once more for taking out your time. And I understand that it's getting pretty late into the night for you as well.
Always a pleasure. No, this is how I'm trying to make up to Sonia for missing her invite.
No, 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 not allowed. You need to get here. We
I
need
know
to
I
go
will
out.
be
We need
back.
to,
I'm
yeah, yeah, yeah.
not going to miss a chance to come back to the
Yes, yes,
brewery. Trust me.
yes. And the library bar, yeah.
Oh, okay. So then I'll have to definitely spend longer.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and thank you,
Thank you,
Sonia.
everyone, yeah, for being
Thank you,
part.
everyone, for
It's
joining.
wonderful to meeting all of you. Thank you.
Yeah. And we'll be
Thank you,
sharing the
Deepa.
recording as well soon. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone, and we'll be sharing this on the YouTube as a live link as well. So sorry.
No.
Yeah. So thank you so much, and we'll see you for the next session. And if you've joined the Mind community, you will know when that will be. And yeah, on that note, we say goodbye. Thank you so much, and have a great weekend ahead. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much for
Bye
joining.
Thank
bye.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.